In this section from John's Gospel, it says a large group kept following Jesus because they saw signs of what he was doing for the sick. It is a hallmark of Jesus' movement community, like us, that we believe in healing. We believe in physical healing, we believe in spiritual healing. It doesn't always look like cure, but that doesn't mean there isn't healing. We invite spirit into our reality to remind us that we are our bodies and we are more than our bodies. There's a spirit that continues. Jesus talked about healing. It was one of the base principles for him. And as we think about MCC, healing, I think, is our gift to ourselves and to the broader church. Do we think that the church still needs healing in regard to how it sees lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer people and our allies? I don't think that we have achieved the revolution entirely. And we can see that even right here in liberal Massachusetts, where in just a few months we'll be voting on whether or not to rescind already granted civil rights for transgender people. And I say that to inspire us, to remind us to vote and to be active in that movement, but also because it reminds us that the work is not done. We still have a gift to bring, and that is that we name it, we say it. We're not solely open and affirming, though I like that phrasing too, it means something, but we are the people who say it. During AIDS, we were not the kind, gentle people who took care of the poor, sick, dying gay men. And I say this with gratitude for churches who did that, but who did not want to deal with us as live gay people, right? MCC, how are we different? We are the people. First of all, we're part of the we. We don't reach out. We are the people. And we are engaged in the healing. And we're proud to say the words, not just open and affirming, important as that is, but we say the words, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, all that spectrum. And we're also trying to do something different, create a space where we're all of that together with straight allies. How important is that? That's the MCC healing gift. That's what drew people to Jesus. It's what still we can bring. Now Jesus, when he sees the crowd of hungry people, reacts different ways in each of the four Gospels. Remember, John's Gospel is written a whole generation, maybe two, later than the others, certainly one full generation. He tells the same stories over, like a poet, I think, more than just a prophet. Jesus is both in the Gospel of John, so every story ever that's retold in John's Gospel has more than one meaning. It has an obvious material meaning. It also has a deeper, more imaginative, spiritual meaning too. So in this story, I love this. Jesus looks at this crowd, and his first question to the people who are the leaders with him, Philip and Andrew, is not, do you think that we should do something about this? It's not whether or not they should be involved in addressing the situation of actual hungry people. He doesn't refer it to a study or a commission to say, well, let's see if maybe 6 months or a year from now we can come to some understanding or analysis that will allow us to deploy resources to make a difference. Jesus begins by saying to the people who are there, where are we to buy bread for these people to eat? It's not whether, it's how. We're going to do this. He assumes from the beginning that people who are engaged in the healing work that he's talking about will also engage people who will see a need and address it. Not some future date, but now, here, now. So he says this to Philip and Andrew, and Philip, one of the leaders, has a very practical question. He says, taking inventory of their resources, we don't even have enough money to make a difference. 6 months' wages would not be enough to buy bread for each of them to get a little. Now, Jesus doesn't judge this impulse because it is important for us to look at our money. It's important for us to look at our assets. It's important for us to be practical, if you will. That's one of the things we're going to do tonight after the meeting, is look at money. It's not unspiritual. And Jesus doesn't say to Philip, oh, don't talk about that. Jesus says, all right, let's factor this in. This is what we're capable of doing materially. It's important. And we are also meeting a material need. That's important. He doesn't just say, send them away with thoughts and prayers. He says, we're going to feed them. But he does take into account what do their assets, what do their material assets have to say about this. And Andrew, who is Peter's brother, Andrew's son, Andrew, says to him, look, there's a young man here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are these among so many people? So he echoes Philip's consideration of what their material assets are. And then he says, well, actually we have a little bit. We do have this. And that one little phrase tells us some things. One, Andrew is looking at everybody there. Sometimes in some of the other gospel accounts, this is described as feeding 5,000, as well as women and children. As if women and children aren't people, right? That's the mindset of this first century text. But Andrew is looking and he sees children as valued participants in the community. That's one insight about the Jesus movement shaking things up. And we too have to see children as valuable participants in the world and worthy of human rights, even though they're not yet adults. And then he says, this young man has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. So he counts the resources. And we have a clue about who these Jesus people are. Barley loaves are what people who don't have a lot of money eat. It's not like we have 5 croissants, 5 baguettes. We've got barley loaves. And so that's just a little marker that who's around there is people who don't necessarily have needs. That doesn't mean that they don't have a role to play in changing the circumstance that they are all involved in. It's a recognition that the we is all of us, not something one does to another. What are we doing together? And everyone is valued, whether they have money or not, or whether they are prestigious or not. So Jesus says to the people, okay, to them, make the people sit down, and I love this verse. Now there was a great deal of grass in the place. When I was a campus pastor in Berkeley, the students always loved this. They would say, see, they have grass. You can have it too. It's a small detail, but... and then it's where it tells us there's 5,000 in all. And here's the best part. Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to them. Jesus took the bread, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to them. What does that sound like? That sounds like communion to me. It's not the story of the Last Supper, but for the early Christians, this was one of the stories that they told when they gathered. There are these whole set of stories about Jesus that are not the Last Supper. And sometimes I wonder what it would be like if when we gathered here each week, we didn't really tell that story, but we told a story about a lot of people coming together and giving thanks and then sharing what they had. And that's what Eucharist or communion means. The word Eucharist that we refer to, the Lord's Supper that we do every week here, part of our worship is here, giving thanks. That's what it actually literally means. So for the first century hearers, it was like Jesus had a communion service right here, right there, with 5,000 people with no bulletins and no hymn books and no rubrics about who may take communion and who may not, who was worthy and who was not. Everybody was welcome. Everyone received. 5,000 in all. And when Jesus took the loaves and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. Also the fish, not just a little bit, as much as they wanted. Jesus' assumption was that everyone deserves what they want. You don't have to convince other people that they're worthy of it. Jesus wanted them to have what they wanted. And then it goes on to say, and they were satisfied. A marker of Jesus-oriented, Jesus-directed, Jesus-centered spirituality is that we can anticipate fulfillment. Not just being full after a meal, but what does it mean to really be satisfied? To have peace to be content. Our lives are not meant to be always only in longing and despair. Jesus modeled for them that when they pool what they have in spiritual community, and they suspend the usual ways of valuing some over others, there will be not only enough, but they will experience satisfaction. They'll be complete. And then this final piece, when they gathered the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, there were 12 baskets left over, because he said to them, gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing will be lost. This is not just a direction about food, it's poetry. Gather up the fragments that are lost. So 12 baskets for them would, in their minds, for those who were of a Jewish background, that would be the 12 tribes of Israel. When they heard the word 12, that's what they thought of. It meant everybody we could think of that we know. Jesus said, everybody that we could think of that we know, that's what 12 means in this story, is here. But gather up the fragments so that no one's lost. He's not just talking about bread. He's talking about people. Nobody lost. Even the people that we don't think of first. Even the people that we might think of as different. No lost people when Jesus sets the table. Everybody's included. Everybody's important. Now I say this because this is what I think church is. It's the place where we come together, where we acknowledge the material reality that we find ourselves in, where we look at our assets, our finances, and also we open our hearts to spirit so that we can see what others cannot yet see. And that's the place that we proceed from. This is your imagination place to come every Sunday night. The rest of the week you will have people say, you can only do this, you can only do that. This is the place where we come together and say, actually, maybe we can do more than we ever hoped or imagined. That's what church is. And it's about changing the material circumstances, poverty, lack of access to food, lack of access to health care, all of that are a feature of the way we distribute resources in the world today. It's also about making a difference so that when people encounter us in addressing their material needs, our material needs, also their spirits are enlarged too, right? We are not just talking about what's before us. We see bread and we see cup. We see dreams and hopes and imagination and possibilities. That's one reason why we come to church and why we do it every week. I don't know about you, but I need to be reminded weekly about what I can't fathom rationally only. So that brings us to this book, The Great Believers, that chronicles the story that's our past historically in MCC, but very specifically a group of people who were engaged in HIV/AIDS activism in the 1980s, remember, when there was just AZT, and sometimes not even that. Before there was protease, when the trajectory of a person's life was from the time of diagnosis to the time of likely death, 9 months. So in just a few years, once AZT became a feature of treatment, it would change to 18 months for people all the way up to the mid-90s, when now people who have access to health care and medication can live much longer, indefinite lives. And I'm a testimony, I'm exhibit A of that, all right? Alan too, we both talked about that here. But this is a scene from an early protest. And I love these group scenes because I think that's what was also happening with Jesus gathering the 5,000. It was a big unruly crowd with dreams. They knew the world wasn't the way it was supposed to be. They didn't know what they were going to do next. It's a little bit like MCC right now. We know things aren't quite right, but we know what we're going to do next, but we're still here. And this is just a brief description of one of their protests in the 80s for access to medical care for people with HIV who did not have insurance, for example, right? So this is a protest there. Someone kept shouting, no violence. And the character that I'm going to talk about is a guy named Yale Tishman, and he is HIV positive. The cops streamed closer. They picked a woman off the end of the line and carried her screaming to a police truck. They came back for the man next to her and the man next to him. The police wore blue plastic gloves One wore a paper face mask. There were cameras still, but the news crews had all moved to the side. The people dashing through the front lines with camcorders were protesters recording this for posterity. One stopped in front of Teddy. "Say something," he called, and Teddy shouted, "Their gloves don't match their shoes." The crowd took it up, an old favorite. "Your gloves don't match your shoes. You'll see it on the news. Your gloves don't match your shoes. You'll see it on the news." Can you remember that energy, that excitement? That's why we gather in groups, to register our protest against the status quo. That's what was happening for those 5,000. They felt alive, maybe for the first time ever. That's what MCC has given many of us. We learned to feel alive here, and we're not done with that. We aren't. I know we're not. And there's something else I want to say about Metropolitan Community Church. I can read this passage of literature that describes one man kissing another and how it brought life to him. And we recognize that this book has the same sacred value because it tells stories that were lost fragments as this book. And even in many open and affirming churches, I couldn't read the story that leads to a spiritual example based on a man kissing another man. Maybe that will change over time. And it will change because of our witness in churches like MCC. That's not something we turn away from, that's something we embrace. So, groups gathering to make a difference, even a small difference. I want to lift up two more for us today. I had a very brief moment of spiritual revival, remembering, it was 4 years ago that Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson by the police, Missouri. And so much activism resulted from that, and a Black Lives Matter movement quickened as a result of that. And I saw his mother on a news spot. Leslie McSpadden is her name. Leslie with a Z, McSpadden. You can look her up. Who announced that she is now a candidate for the city council in Ferguson, Missouri. And just seeing her standing there like that, what she said was, "How can you watch your son's body in the sun, covered just by a tarp, for 4 hours, being ignored by the elected officials who were there to take care of us and not have a response?" It took her some years. This is the phrase I love from the interview. "I had to learn to walk again." That has credibility to me. She suffered. And when she says she had to learn to walk again, I know that's poetry. That's more than the material. It's about what it means to pick up in the face of adversity and say, "I'm going to do what I can to make a difference. I might just have 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes, but I'm going to do what I can." So I lift up Leslie McSpadden as a heroine of faith for us today, as we remember the anniversary of Michael Brown. And then also, I want to close by referencing this. A year ago in Charlottesville, this weekend, there was a huge outpouring of white supremacists. And our own president was unwilling to condemn this at the time as an outpouring of racism. And there were also religious people and secular people standing up to this racism in Charlottesville and to this event. You'll see that there were events this weekend that are taking place to remember this right now. But Heather Heyer was the young woman who was killed by one of the white supremacists. He used his car as a weapon, ran her over, and she lost her life as a result. That was just a year ago, right now, this weekend. And at the eulogy that her mother gave a few days later, this is what Susan Rowe, Heather Heyer's mother, said. "They tried to kill my daughter to shut her up. Well, guess what? You just magnified her. I want this to spread. I didn't want her to die. This is just the beginning of Heather's legacy. You need to find in your heart that small part of accountability. You poke that finger at yourself like Heather would have done. and you make it happen. You take the extra step. You find a way to make a difference in the world. So remember in your heart, she went on, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. Find what's wrong. Don't ignore it. Don't look the other way. Look what I can do to make a difference. That's how you are going to make my child's death worthwhile. And she closed with these words, I'd rather have my child, but by golly, if I've got to give her up, we're going to make it count. That's the kind of faith that I want to invite us to keep in mind. A group that even with 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes isn't afraid to try and feed each other. And their insight that there is no one who deserves to be lost. AIDS activists from the 80s who weren't afraid to stand up and say, your gloves don't match your shoes. You can see it on the news. Leslie McSpad remembering her son Michael Brown, and Susan Rowe remembering her daughter Heather Heyer. This is the heart of what MCC is too. Let it be our prayer. Amen.